Okay, it looks like it's just about 7 o'clock. I'd like to welcome you to Gardening Green Expo 2023. The Expo is sponsored by the NSRWA, the Water Smart Program, and Kennedy's Country Gardens. Before we get started, I want to tell you a little bit about Zoom. Down at the bottom in the toolbar, you'll see something called Q&A. If you think of any questions during the presentation, you can type them into the Q&A, and then I will address those after the presentation is done. Now, I would like to present Plymouth County Entomologist, Blake Dinius.
Hi, and welcome everyone tonight. Thank you so much for coming and carving out this time to listen to my presentation. My name is Blake Dinius, and I work for Plymouth County Extension, which is a service that is provided here in Plymouth County. I put together these presentations, and they're all, they're all kind of free. This is really what I'm paid to do. So any kind of topic that's related to insects, I'm here to talk about. And this topic tonight is really, really fun, and I'm really excited about it because I feel as though, especially the people who are attending tonight, probably have heard a lot about bees and butterflies and all sorts of things like that. But what I'm here to talk about tonight are the things that are not bees. And I do have some butterflies in here, but specifically not bees and not monarchs. Even though they're really important, I know you guys already know about that. And so I really wanted to take this time to cover a different topic, which is also really interesting. And I had a lot of fun putting together this presentation because there is just, oh my gosh, there is so much to talk about. So let's just jump right in. All right, let's go ahead. So I want to talk about like a quick introduction. When it comes to mammals, and don't get me wrong, I love these. They're called red pandas, and they're endangered. But when it comes to mammals, we just love them. We make time to care about them, and they kind of latch on to us, and we open up their hearts to this. And we're just very mammal centric and vertebrate centric as a culture. The thing that always kind of gets me, especially as someone who really likes insects, is that when it comes to insects, the first question that people always seem to want to know is, what does it do for me? And this is something that really kind of bugs me, right? No pun intended, huh? It's just one of those things that we always want to have a purpose for something that is not a vertebrate. And to that end, we talk a lot about bees, right? We these memes, these things we see on the internet about how important bees are to our way of life. Again, that the only reason that bees are important is because they affect our way of life, apparently, according to some people, not me, of course. But it is kind of true. Bees are certainly important. This was taken from a study in 2016 where they looked at total crop pollination services. And what you can see here is that honeybees, just a single species, make up 39% of all crops pollinated. But you got a good chunk of non-honeybees pollinating, but combined, they're making up about 62% of all crop pollination services. So bees are no doubt the rock stars when it comes to crop pollination. But what I like about this study, what really jumps out to me, is that this shows that non-bees are also really, really important. And this is more than, this is just focused on crop pollination. This is not talking about things like lady slippers, right? And so again, it's really important that we think about this, right? So this is kind of a confusing chart. So I have certain things, kind of animations where I just kind of block out everything. I just want you to focus on something. So up until this moment right here, this is a moment in time we call the angiosperm terrestrial revolution, right? And you can see that the wider the lines are, the more diversity there is. And you can see it steadily increasing. But right at this point right here that I'm going to focus in on, you see this explosion of angiosperms, that's flowering plants, right? And then following that, you get this explosion of other types of animals, specifically the invertebrates, right? So you're looking at spiders, the Orthoptera, grasshoppers and crickets and katydids. Hemipterans are the true bugs. Hymenoptera, that includes bees. Coleoptera includes all the beetles. The Lepidoptera are the butterflies and moths. And then the Diptera are the flies. So basically coinciding with this explosion in diversity among flowering plants was this explosion in diversity among these invertebrates as well. And so that's, again, really key. And that continues on until present day, right? And we know this, right? We know this. And I'm sure that maybe you've heard this quote before, but about 78% of all the United States native flowering plants depend on native pollinators. You might have seen that number be a little bit higher, maybe about 87%. But those figures are, it depends on what those figures are referring to. If they're referring to something maybe worldwide, it's about 87%. But here in the United States, Allerton et al. Found it to be about 78%. But so non-bee pollinators are also really, really important. And they come in all these different shapes and sizes. Flies are very, very important. There is a recent study that was published about what would the world look like without bees. And it's actually, there is an island that exists, I believe it's somewhere around Australia, that has no bees. And they have only flies that pollinate. And the world looks very green. But there are flies are involved in a lot of pollination. For maybe my astute audience, astute members of the audience, that photo in the center bottom, that's a mosquito. And so mosquitoes are good for more than just sucking blood. You can see that covered in pollen as well. Your butterflies and moths, very, very important. The sphinx moths especially. And you've got all these small orange butterflies that are not monarchs, still really important for plants. And then wasps, kind of maybe a did you know that kind of fact that you can throw it at your dinner parties, is that bees are actually wasps. And I know I said I wasn't going to include bees, so these are going to be the non-bee wasps. And you've got a whole bunch of them that serve as pollinators. Now, they're not going specifically, a lot of them, we do have some pollen wasps that go for pollen, but most of these wasps are going to be going for the nectar in the plants, and they're going to be incidentally pollinating the plants by mistake. And then beetles, of course, there are a number of beetles that just hang out. Same deal as wasps. They're smooth. They might not be picking up a ton of pollen, but it could happen, right? You never know. But when it comes to this talk about pollinators, I do want to stop, and I know you guys can't respond. I'm kind of talking to this captive audience, but I have this big question, right? So what is it that we're actually fighting for when we're opening this dialogue about pollinators? What is it that's really important to us? And the things that I see mentioned the most, and maybe this is not true for you, but this is what I've noticed on social media, for instance, is that the talk almost always focuses on money. How much can pollinators offer us? And food. How important are pollinators to our American diet, right? And I think that maybe we should be thinking about something more, right? There's more to this whole conversation than how do these things affect us, right? Shouldn't the existence be enough? Like going back to that example about the red panda, I don't know what a red panda does. I mean, it presumably does certain things in its environment. I'm not really a backbone vertebrate kind of guy. I like my things a little bit with their exoskeletons on the outside. But to me, this is a really cool stink bug. It's one of my favorites. And I found this here in Miles Standish. It's pretty uncommon. There's another green stink bug that looks a lot like it, but it's not as cute as this one. And to me, just seeing this, it's enough. That's enough. I like that this exists. And I'm grateful that we have protected places like Miles Standish that exist, Wampatuck and World's End, all these wonderful places that exist, because that's enough, right? Now, this is another thing that's kind of really cool, is that nearly every terrestrial or freshwater plant is fed on by an insect. So more than just the pollination, right? More that the plant is more than just that one feature, that the whole body, the whole structure of a plant is important to the way of life that we know it. When we look out the window, that whole way of life, everything that we're seeing outside. And you can see this, got some window feeding, some leaf mining, and some munching on leaves. So this is kind of the thing that you want to break away from, that maybe you want to open your mind up to, that maybe the stuff around your house doesn't need to necessarily look pristine. Maybe this is the way it should look. Now I've got 2 kids at home. I've got a 2-year-old and a 3.5-year-old. And I'm going to tell you this, like when I put something in front of them on the table, I want that to look like it's been eaten. I don't want it to look pristine, right? I cooked up steak tips over the weekend and it looked pristine. It looked like they hadn't touched it. You could go ahead and sell those steak tips to someone else. Now I put pizza in front of them tonight and it was all chewed up like this. That's the way you kind of want your garden to look, right? You want it to be used. You're putting the plants out there as food, right? So that you can be anything from, just sipping nectar. A lot of these insects will just sip nectar. You've got, your moths. This is actually a butterfly, believe it or not, on the top left. One of my favorites called a dusky wing, and it's nectaring on yellow indigo. You've got some, butterflies, and you've got some ants as well. Like a lot of insects will nectar. They'll just go after the nectar. And so the plant is providing that service for them. Munching on leaf matter. You've got caterpillars, grasshoppers, crickets, katydids. The two things on the right here that look like caterpillars are actually sawflies. And I love those. One of the other things that I wanted to bring up is that a lot of these pictures, and I'm not a professional photographer by any means, but a lot of these photos are mine because I wanted to show people that there is so much diversity that they can find in their own backyards. I found all of this in my own backyard, all these really crazy looking creatures just living in my backyard. And you can do that too. It's just kind of an amazing thing to see. Insects will also bore into wood and stems, and that's another important service. And a lot of times with our native species, that wood boring isn't necessarily going to outright kill the tree or kill the plant. The boring tends to mostly occur with stressed or dying plants, and that you tend to see that. And a lot of times people think that it's the insect that killed the plant, when really there are a number of other factors. It's a confluence of factors that are contributing to the death of that plant. But most of your native plants and most of your native borers are fine working together. And these are all, again, all native insects that you can find that might take advantage of boring into wood. That grub-like creature in the bottom right is really cool. That's actually a moth. Even though it looks like a beetle grub, it's called a carpenter worm moth. And you can throw that out. Again, if you see something online, it looks like a grub and someone's like, oh, it's a beetle, it's a bad beetle. It's not. It's a moth. It's a native moth that's not going to kill the trees that it's boring into, assuming that tree is in healthy condition. Taking advantage of any sap or maybe sucking plant juice out of the plants. We've got a number of different true bugs, plant hoppers. I like this one, Graphocephala, and the right candy striped leaf hopper is the common name. You've got a nice morning cloak in the top left. It's just nectaring on some running sap flows. And those morning cloaks are not going to go to flowers. They're specifically after that sap that's coming out of trees. Feeding on fruit, seeds, and flowers. You got your, the top left is a milkweed bug. And a lot of times people get mad because they want their milkweed to be for the monarchs. But the milkweed is supporting so many different kinds of insects. You love seeing this. And I love this bug. Not only do I love bugs, but it's got that nice black heart on the back of it, just showing you how much it needs to be loved. And the bug on the bottom is a special kind of bug. Not a lot of people see them. They're called ebony bugs, and they're bugs that will feed on seeds. And then you've got the plum curculio and the apple maggot, which I know a lot of apple farmers, they don't like these bugs. But these are native bugs that, they're just doing their thing, feeding on fruits, consuming roots. Your cicadas and the cicadas and a lot of the scarab beetles, they'll feed on roots. The cicadas, we should actually be getting a good, some cicadas might be emerging on the Cape either next year or the year after. The early emergers will be next year, and then we should be getting a big chunk of the cicadas emerging in 2025 on the Cape. And this is really cool. Another way that insects use plants is by hijacking their DNA to form galls. So when we talk about GMOs, genetically modified organisms, insects have been doing that forever. They've been doing it way before us. And believe it or not, we think there's some older research that claims that all of the fruit that we eat, from tomatoes to oranges to watermelons, initially started out as a gall, as an insect that hijacked the DNA inside the reproductive structure of a developing plant. And they were able to basically genetically modify that for generations until we got the fruit that we eat today. So you can thank an insect for all of that. But I've got some good examples of galls that you might see walking around. The wolf sower gall on the top left. This is the bottom left is actually a mite. It's not an insect. It's an areophyte mite. But then the bottom right is an ocelate gall midge, a type of fly. And you got some round bullet gall wasps in the top right. And again, all these you can find in your own backyard. It's kind of cool. Feeding on dead wood. So even after the plant has died, right? Let's say you have a tree and it's been attacked by these wood borers. It was dying anyways. That's okay. You put it out to pasture. Even after it's dead, it's still providing the service for insects. You got reddish brown stag beetles, chafer beetles, and termites are all going to take advantage of this dead and dying wood and break that down. They need that wood. So the plant, from the beginning of its life, from the seed, throughout the course of its life, all these different parts, the insects have taken advantage of, and they depend on that. They even take shelter and build nests with plant material. You've got some, European hornets, not native, but that's building a nest inside this tree. Carpenter ants are going to build nests inside wood, and then grass-carrying wasps in the genus Isodontia are going to build their nests with plant material. You can see on the bottom right, that's an example of a nest built from this grass-carrying wasp. And you can see all that grass kind of plugged into that hole that the grass-carrying wasp was building. And then this is really kind of cool. Some weird and unusual ways that insects use plants. And there are more. Trust me, I'm probably leaving some stuff out when I go and give this talk, but I could only fit in so much. Your dogbane leaf beetles, these are actually going to feed on the plant dogbane, and they're going to sequester the toxins. They're going to eat, by eating this toxic plant, they themselves are going to become toxic. So use a plant in order to provide defense for themselves. This is a mosquito, but this is called Cochleatidia perturbans, or the cattail mosquito. Actually uses plants to breathe. And you can see it kind of sticking its little butt end into the root of a plant, and it will actually use these cattails in order to breathe. And so that's another way. They can use plants as an air source, as an air supply while they live underneath water. And then this particular plant is called Weomia. There's a purple pitcher plant, and the insect that I'm talking about is a mosquito, another mosquito called Weomia smithi. Does not have a common name. But this plant and this mosquito have a very intimate relationship. Now, most people know that carnivorous plants, they can digest insects, but this particular carnivorous plant cannot digest anything that falls in on its own. It actually requires this mosquito to live inside it and digest the larger particulates. And then as that mosquito is digesting those large particulates, what it kind of excretes as waste, the mosquito's waste products, the poop of the mosquito, that is what the purple pitcher plant eats. So this mosquito is part of the digestive system of the purple pitcher plant, and they're both native to our area. And this Weomia smithi mosquito doesn't even suck blood because it's eating the other insects they get trapped inside this purple pitcher plant. So a really kind of a cool relationship between some really great organisms. So that's what I want you really to stop and think about with this Gardening Green Expo, is that it's more than just pollinators. When you go outside and you garden for things, you're doing more than just growing plants for pollinators. The entire plant is a resource. And that's what you want to think of when you go out and you go and purchase native plants, that it's not just one thing, that you're talking about trying to restore the environment back to the way it should be. And you've got, let's just take this is just a story that I'm going to talk about, right? So goldenrod, let's take goldenrod for example. It doesn't look like a whole lot here. Looks kind of weedy, looks kind of messy. I think it looks beautiful. I'm the kind of person that likes the kind of messy quality about nature. I really like this, right? But you've got first, goldenrod, it's going to attract some pollinators. Then it's going to attract herbivores that might feed on the goldenrod itself. Then the predators are going to move in and they're going to feed on maybe the herbivores, maybe they're going to feed on the pollinators. So it's supporting all this life. And again, all these taken from my own backyard, you can see all this diversity. It's like an island of diversity in this goldenrod. And the other thing about goldenrod is that there's a special fly that forms a special kind of gall on this goldenrod. It's called the goldenrod gall fly. And you can see that this is what it will look like in the winter. So if you have goldenrod that's been kind of dying back, that's what you want to look for. And that goldenrod fly, so not only is the goldenrod supporting the fly in the gall formation, but there's a wasp that's going to specifically go after that. There's actually a few parasitoids that will go after that that gall fly. You've got beetles that will attack that gall fly, and you have birds that will attack the gall fly. So again, just that one gall fly, it's supporting. So the goldenrod's supporting the gall fly, and then the gall fly is supporting even more things afterward. And that's the magic of a native plant. That's what you're gonna get when you plant native plants in your own backyard and you allow them to grow. But there's increasing evidence that insects need our help. And this is a kind of a confusing chart. I debated on leaving this out, but what I want to show you, and yeah, this is talking about bumblebees. I know this is about presentations, not bumblebees. Still, it's really hard to get good data on a lot of different kinds of insects, and in bee data is just what I had on hand. What I have highlighted are the bumblebee species that are in decline based on this one study. And if you look at it, the dark bars are what the bumblebee species were in this particular area in the 70s. And then the researchers went and looked at them again in the early 2000s. And that's what the gray bars are. But what you can notice here is that some bee species, like Bombus bimaculatus, the two-spotted bee, and the Bombus impatiens, the common eastern bumblebee, even Bombus griseocolus, the brown belted bee, those three bee species are increasing. And so that's one of the things. It's a complicated picture where some bee species are going up, but a lot of the bee species, most of them, are going down. And that's what you want to pay attention to when you are looking at some of the stuff in your garden. Is it common stuff? Is it rare stuff? Sometimes, and I don't want to be too discouraging, but sometimes people will tell me, they'll be like, oh, I had so many bees in my yard, and then they're really excited, and I just don't have the heart to tell them that it's all Bombus impatiens, the common eastern bumblebee, and all honeybees, which are really not in need of our help. And that's usually what you'll find around a lot of dandelions and clovers and a lot of these non-native species, is highly adaptable generalist kind of pollinators, as opposed to some of the more specific ones that need our help. But anyways, we're not going to dwell on that. The story is, again, complicated. It's bad. It's not great. Oh no, right? Oh no, I love capturing this photo of that fly just kind of like that, right? Very complicated picture. But the good news, the great news, the best news about this is that the solution is simple. We can do this, and we can do this starting in our own backyards. Because in this particular, there's a lot of criticism I have for this study, but what these researchers noted is that the main drivers of a lot of these declines are about 50% is habitat loss, and over a quarter of that is pollution. So over 75% of the reason that these researchers believe insects are declining are things that are well within our control, right? So we start with this. We start at home. We start in our own backyards. We start by getting rid of this, right? This is your American lawn. Now, I know it's something that we've grown up with, and we like playing in it, but this, my friends, is an ecological desert. I give a talk on ticks, right? I also give talks on tick bite prevention, and one of the first things I tell people is have an American lawn, right? Because not even ticks can grow in this type of habitat. It's a non-native grass species, doesn't support a lot of life. The only thing you're really going to get out of this are going to be mostly in a lot of invasive species and non-native species, right? So the goal is habitat heterogeneity, and you can throw that out at your dinner parties. I need to say things like that every now and then just so you guys think I'm smart. You say habitat heterogeneity like you really know what you're talking about. But the idea is that we have so many varied insects. We have thousands upon thousands upon thousands. They estimate about 30 million species of insects worldwide. That with so many varied life cycles, life stages, life histories, that you need varied habitat. And that's what we're trying to bring back to our yards, is getting rid of this plain looking grass that's all the same and creating that diversity, that variation, using plants as that foundation. And what you want to do is you want to start with your natives and your non-cultivars. Think about these plants as your healthy whole foods, the foods that you want the most of. Now, I know that there's going to be some gardeners in this presentation that it needs to be fun, right? They need to have plants that they just like the look of. A lot of these natives are small. I think they're beautiful, but they're white or yellow. They're not pinks and all these different colors. Some of them are, but a lot of these gardeners, they want things to be really interesting. They want their landscapes to look nice for their neighbors. So we want to minimize those. I'm not going to tell you not to have any of them, even though that's what I want to say. But I know that there's some people that they don't want this to be a black and white issue, right? What I'm going to tell you instead is that you foster these natives, have as many of them as you can tolerate, as you can allow. Keep the ones you have, plant others. Because, you know, how do pollinators, and not just pollinators, but insects view non-natives and cultivars? I know when I was driving, when they made this exit sign change, this is how I felt. Now, if you can imagine, like, I've been experiencing these exits for about 20 years of driving, right? Give or take. Now, imagine if you're an insect that has been looking at a particular plant for millions of years, right? That you're going to be really mad, right? Now, what if we change it and change the color, right? What if we change the shape? This is why you want to avoid these non-natives and cultivars, because we don't know if these insects are going to be able to adapt to them. But some insects can. Some insects can and have adapted. So you don't want to just remove the non-natives you have. You need to replace them, right? You don't want to leave a void in the resources, right? What if you have a spring blooming flower like a dandelion? You want to have another spring blooming flower that is like maybe like an annual fleabane that blooms in the spring as well. And I know there's a number of other early spring blooming willows are really great in the spring as well. So you want to replace those, right? So you want to take the dandelions out, but you don't want to just pull the non-natives thinking they're doing no good. They could be providing nectar, they could be providing food, they could be doing something, but we don't know what they're doing, but you want to pull those and fill them with something else. Here's a good example. This is a Baltimore checker spot. It's a type of butterfly. We see them in isolated populations around here. They tend to be abundant in isolated areas, in isolated pockets. But this particular butterfly feeds and has its normal host is a plant called turtlehead. It's a funny looking plant. It actually does look like a turtle's head. But now this butterfly, due to the scarcity of some of these turtlehead, has adapted to English plantain, which is not a native. And that's the photo in the middle. And you can see these caterpillars ravenously feeding on that English plantain, right? And so if you were to go around and pull that English plantain thinking it's doing nothing and not replacing it with turtlehead, then you're leaving a void in those resources, and you could be doing inadvertent harm to this Baltimore checker spot, which again has adapted to utilize that resource. So it's again important to replace these non-native plants. Planting a wide variety, I'm sure you're going to hear this more than once throughout this week if you attend to more than one workshop. But it's really important because a lot of these native insects, these have very short adult lifespans, right? This is a frosted elfin. It's an endangered species that we have here in Massachusetts. Its adult stage is very limited, but you can see that the caterpillar is going to be active right around May, kind of June, and then it's going to spend most of its life as a pupa, hidden away from sight. It isn't until about April, May-ish that we tend to see the flying adults. But what's really important about this is that that's the window that this particular insect is active. And this is true for a lot of insects that we have around here, that you just don't see them all that often. So it's really important that we provide food sources for them. And this particular insect is going to feed on, the caterpillar is going to feed on the wild indigo. But the image I have in the center here is a bearberry. And that is an excellent ground cover that we see all over Miles Standish. And it's just a great resource for these early flying butterflies. And you can find tons of early flying butterflies that are nectaring on that bearberry. Now, their larvae, their caterpillars aren't going to feed on it, but it's really important as a nectar source. So supplementing that yellow wild indigo with something different, right? And many insects, in particular, a lot of the caterpillars, have very special diets, and they feed on only a handful of plants. Everyone knows monarchs need milkweed, but we've got the pipe vine swallowtails are going to feed on Aristolochia. The black swallowtails are going to feed on things like dill, and then you've got your fritillary butterflies that are going to feed on violets. And I like to bring up the fritillaries because a lot of people don't like violets. Violets are not easy to contain, but you're not going to have fritillaries if you don't have violets. You might see them in your yard nectaring on things, but the caterpillars, specifically the caterpillars, need those violets in order to survive. This is an interesting study, and I wish I had a picture to go along with it. And it's in Ohio, so take everything with a grain of salt. But what I want you to focus on most is the concepts in this study. This was published last year in 2022. And the researchers looked at degraded strip mines in Ohio over a 10-year period. And what they wanted to determine is, with no maintenance, that means no mowing, no weeding, what would happen if they seeded the area with high diversity seed mixes and low diversity seed mixes. So when you think about it, they're looking to see what types of plants would persist under zero maintenance. And I think this has a lot of application for maybe people in this audience who might be thinking about planting in maybe the sides of, maybe planting in areas that they know they're not going to be able to get in there and mow or weed all that often. Maybe they're looking at trying to restore some of the habitats, and they want some of these set and forget types of plants. So what you want to look at the bottom, and because this is Ohio, not all the plants are going to be native, but I did bold the ones that are native to our area. And that's going to be the wild bee balm, this Monarda fistuliosa, Penstemon digitalis, Air and Clinopodium vulgare. And the common names are here at the bottom. And you can see at the top, the ones that persisted are the Rudbeckias, so your black-eyed Susan groups, and Helianthus is going to be your sunflowers. So while these particular species are not native to our area, they are in a group that did persist. So in these species that persisted for those 10-year periods with no mowing, no weeding, right? So that, again, something to think about as you think about planning your garden around, especially if you know you're not going to have a lot of time to get in there and weed and mow. The next thing I want you to think about are homes for these insects, right? What I want you to think about too is microhabitats, not the large scale, but down on the small scale, because insects are very small. They're going to be susceptible to a lot of changes that go on. Everyone I'm sure you're going to hear this again, leave the leaves, save the stems. There's a lot of insects that are going to depend on you leaving a lot of the structure around, right? More than just bees. You got a leopard moth in the center that's going to depend on leaves, overwintering under leaves. Cecropia moth on the top left that's going to form its cocoon on some stems. And then you've got a hibernacula for a red spotted purple butterfly. So that's going to be the caterpillar. It's not a pupa, it's not a chrysalis, it's actually just the caterpillar. And it's going to form, basically, it's going to fold over that leaf, and it's going to survive the winter in that. And if you were to just get rid of the old, the things that look a little bit messy, you may inadvertently be getting rid of a lot of the homes of these particular insects. And I want to kind of show you, this was taken from a tick study done in 2019, but I really like this because it shows you just how much leaves and snow protect organisms from the cold. And you focus here right in February. In this particular study, the ambient air temperature dropped down to minus 9.4 degrees Fahrenheit. And if you recall, that last cold spell that we got dropped down to about 0 degrees Fahrenheit, right? So this was even colder. But in this study, under the leaves and snow, it was still about 27 degrees Fahrenheit. So that is just how much leaves and snow will protect an insect from that biting cold. So leaving those leaves can be a swing of about 30 more than 30 degrees. Can be a swing of over 30 degrees just by leaving it. And you don't think of leaves and snow as being warm, but they're doing enough to protect these insects that have lived in New England for thousands and thousands of years. But don't just stop there. Remember when we talked about how there's a number of different insects that are going to utilize dead wood? If possible, your stumps, any of the fallen trees, any of that stuff is going to be really important for leaving around to provide homes for all of these insects. One of the things, and this is again taken from a study about bees, but something to think about, because the research is new and it's continuing to develop. We believe that flower arrangement might actually matter. And this is still something kind of new, but in this study, and this came out at the end of 2021, what they found is that a garden like this, which I know a lot of pollinators are designed like, were great for large bees like bumblebees, but that small bees, some of our small solitary native bees, did not like this flower arrangement, that they tended to prefer visiting isolated patches of flowers. So not like this. And so it's weird to think about that maybe all of the pollinator gardens nationwide that are set up like this might actually be excluding some of our most important, most endangered, most in need of protection types of bees and types of organisms. That these might look nice to us, but maybe because they're not so natural, they may not look that great for some of the developing insects in the area. Another study that came out was that maybe flower arrangement matters for monarchs. Like, so we've got this milkweed arrangement, and what they found is that in the left photo, if milkweed was planted in 1 meter, with 1 meter between a center of wildflowers and then half a meter between each milkweed plant, then you got 2.5 to 4 times more eggs and caterpillars than the other arrangements, where you had milkweed in the middle and wildflowers on the outside, or where everything was mixed in and mishmashed. And so again, maybe flower arrangement might matter. Maybe it does make a difference how you design your pollinator garden. But this is still all, all relatively new information. It's just, I just kind of want you guys to keep an open mind when you're moving forward about these kinds of things. The next and kind of final thing that I want to bring up, and this is really important, is that it's critical that we learn to reduce light pollution. And this is going to affect the night flying insects that depend on plants as well, like your moths, for instance. And this is a really serious issue. I read a recent study that they had this crazy statistic. They said, the researchers said, if a child who looks up at a sky today sees about 250 stars in the sky, by the time they hit their 18th birthday, there will only be 100 stars left for them to see. That is how quickly we're losing the stars in the sky based on this light pollution. Now, if you can imagine that that's sad for us, right, to not have stars, imagine how that must affect an insect that depends on the darkness of the sky, either in order to communicate or in order to fly around. Very, very critical stuff. But again, I don't want to leave you on a grim note. What I do want to leave you with is that this whole thing is not all or nothing. Take baby steps. If the only thing you get out of this afterward is that you leave a patch of goldenrod in your yard, that's enough. I'm okay with that. That's enough for me, because this is going to be a group effort, right? This is not going to be something where one person is going to be able to shoulder the burden and really pull through, kind of like how Tom Brady does, on whatever football team he plays on. But it's going to be something where we all need to come together and work together in order to get through this. So at this point, I'd like to thank everyone for attending. I hope that this hasn't run too long, but I was really excited about this, and I hope that you guys learned a thing or two. And if you have any other questions, just feel free to ask them now. And I'll start by answering the ones that have come through in the chat. So my first question is that it comes from a member of the audience. They said, are there any companies that you suggest that treat for mosquitoes without killing bees? Oh man, that's a great one. So here's the thing about mosquitoes and pesticides, right? Unless you're treating for mosquitoes with something like Bacillus thuringiensis israelensis that only affects mosquitoes, it's a BTI, and that's usually what people use in mosquito dunks, and they're going to treat water with that, then there is not a pesticide that will not kill other things, right? If it kills mosquitoes, it will kill other things if it's a spray, right? Even your organic sprays, even your all natural sprays, there have been a lot of studies that kind of demonstrate this. Even if you have an all natural spray, you will see a dip in populations of other insects where an all natural spray has been conducted, because they are harming other insects as well. And so don't let any of these companies try to convince you otherwise, right? Now, what I would recommend most for mosquitoes is going along the route of minimizing the amount of water and things like that, standing water, leaf debris and stuff like that in your yard, to kind of promote that natural source reduction of mosquitoes, as opposed to getting a spray conducted. Next up, it says, what is the yellow flower? My last slide. I believe that's goldenrod. I'm not sure if it's a native goldenrod from around here. I believe it's goldenrod, but not really. I picked it and I was like, yeah, that's probably goldenrod, and so I put that in there. Next question: are praying mantises good for plants? Praying mantises, that's a very controversial topic that we don't, up here in Massachusetts, we do not have native mantises. There is something called a Carolina mantis that is moving further north. We think maybe due to something like climate change, but here we're not supposed to have mantids here. Now, the ones that do exist here in Massachusetts have been here for a very long time, and we don't think are impacting a lot of our populations of insects much more so than, say, our native spiders or anything like that. We don't think so. There is some evidence that they are doing some kind of nasty things. Like you do see some like heart-wrenching photos of them eating hummingbirds or eating monarchs, but we think that in terms of impacting the populations of those, again, it's kind of up for debate, and there hasn't been a lot of solid data. But I'm not going to say it's no. I'm going to give you a wishy-washy answer and say I'm not sure. Maybe, but my guess is probably not. Next question. It says, I have left all the leaves in my garden and surrounding areas. When can I begin to rake them up without damaging insects? The real answer to this question is you should never, you never rake them up. That you want to leave them forever, because there are some plants that require the leaves to stay there for years and years and years and to build up in this thick layer of duff. Like our maple seedlings and maple saplings really like that. But I know that you need to find a compromise. And so one of the things you want to do is you want to wait for a period of time where the temperature is going to be above 50 degrees for a good long stretch. And a lot of insects are going to emerge after that point. And so then you can kind of compromise. But just know that if you're not leaving the leaves there forever, there's going to be certain things that are going to be impacted, and you are going to be damaging something on some level, right? But again, what I would recommend, and I think this was a great recommendation, this is not something I came up with, so I can't take credit for it, but someone had recommended that just clean up the areas of your yard that you're going to use. So if you can sustain leaves in some other parts of your yard, especially parts near the woods and things like that that you might not use, then go ahead and do that, and hold off on it. Because if you do that, then that's great, and you can rake them up even less. You can cause even less damage. Where can you get plants native to Massachusetts? There's a few locations. Garden in the Woods you can go to, and native blue stems in Norwell's is a great place to go to as well. And there's another place, Sweet Fern in Carver and Plymouth. They'll sell native plants as well. Next question is my thoughts on No Mow May. So I think it's a really catchy term, but generally the flowers that you're going to get in May that crop up through your grass are going to be a lot of non-natives: bittercress, chickweed, dandelions, and they're going to support a lot of your generalist pollinators. Again, like your honeybees, your bombus impatiens, things like that. So it's helpful, but it's not as good as, say, if you were to plant natives during that time frame, right? So I like that it's catchy. I like that people are talking about this, but there are some cons to it too. And that, again, you get a lot of non-native plants kind of creeping up through your grass as well. And so it's good and bad. I'm not 100% in on it. I'd rather just foster the idea of having less lawn in general, not just for May, but less lawn in general and more native plants. That's the direction I would recommend. Next one, are you doing in-person programs for garden clubs? Yes, I do. I do a lot of in-person programs in garden clubs. I just did one for the Weymouth Garden Club up at the Tufts Library this past weekend. So yeah, just reach out to me. My contact information's here. Let me know if you want my presentation. If it's here within Plymouth County, I do it for free. What does milkweed beetles feed on prior to seeds being prevalent? The milkweed beetles. That's a good question, and I'm actually blanking on that right now. I'd have to get back to you. I'm sorry. I don't know. It's kind of late and I'm blanking on you. I'm sorry. I'll have to get back to you on that one. What about Bob-X used for deer repellent? Does this affect insects? I don't know what Bob-X is. I'm not sure. I'd have to look at what the ingredients are for that. But again, reach out to me. Send me an email and I can get back to you on that one. What agency services beehives? Oh, that's another good question. We do have the Plymouth County Beekeepers Association, so I would reach out to them for that information. But for the beehives, I wanted to focus on the native insects, and honeybees are not native to our area. How can you control insects that negatively impact gardens, such as Japanese beetles and cabbage loopers and aphids? So one of the things about so Japanese beetles can be controlled through, there's some like nematodes and certain things like that will feed on them. And then cabbage loopers and aphids, I would have to get back to you, but I think promoting more of a healthy landscape, you're going to get some predatory insects that are going to feed on those too. But it's tough. It's tough with gardens because the threshold for pests in gardens is not very high, right? Because a small amount of damage in a garden, which we want to eat for fruit, people don't like that. And so it can be a little bit tough, and it's a lot harder to control insects around a garden when you're planning on selling that food or planning on consuming that food. It's a lot harder to use some kind of basically like natural controls. You do tend to have to use some kind of pesticide or some kind of thing similar to that to control, to get that high level of control in gardens, which is why my gardens kind of look like the messy photo where you've got a lot of things eating it, because again, the plant is being consumed by so many different things. All right, great. So I think we've reached the end of the questions. Oh no, there's a couple more coming through the Q&A. It says, ladybugs feed on aphids. They were imported to Massachusetts to do this and became a state bug. Ladybugs are more than one species, and there are many, 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 many ladybugs that are native to Massachusetts that are supposed to be here, and they were not imported. They've been here all along. What about companion planting to control pesky insects? Yeah, I've heard people have some success with companion planting. I'm not a gardener, so I don't know a heck of a lot about that. But I've heard, like, one of my colleagues says she gets good success by companion planting. I'm not sure. Book suggestions, great. I'm glad you asked. I have a lot of book suggestions. So this book right here, Bumblebees of North America, is a great identification guide. I've got the Common Bees of Eastern North America, another great identification guide. This is a new one came in for me. It is Gardening for Moths. And this is for the Ohio region, but it's fantastic. I love that book. The Bees in Your Backyard, another really good resource. For other non-insects, this is a really great insect for just flower flies. So just syrphid flies. Just here, it's this thick of all the different flower flies you can get around your area, just in northeastern North America. So tons of stuff. And then this is a great book, a staple to have, Tracks and Sign of Insects, when you're looking at the types of insects that form galls and things like that around your yard. So some bee books, some non-bee books, but all great books to have in your collection. Yeah, and so this person made a suggestion saying that they keep flowering plants that attract specific wasps. That's the other thing, is wasps are great pest control. They're excellent. They're predators. So they're I'm glad that that's working for you. Thank you. That's something that I learned. The question that another request was, please put a link for the books. If you could just email me and I will send you an email with that, because I don't have a link on hand to send over for the books. But just shoot me a quick email. I've got my email address right here, and I'll be sure to get back to you on those books. What is the best way to fight and reduce no-see-ums? Oh, geez. I was not prepared for this question, so I'd have to get back to you on that one. That's a tough one, and I don't want to guess on that one. I'd have to. I prep myself for this one. That's not something I know off the top of my head. I'm sorry.
I think that's the end of our questions. Thank you, Blake. That was really informative and fun.
Thanks, Lori. I was so glad to be here, and thanks for having me back at this Gardening Green Expo.
Sure. I'd like to tell everybody to please join us tomorrow. We're going to have a composting lecture with Ann McGovern. And then we're also, for the first time in 3 years, going to have a live expo on Saturday at Kennedy's Country Gardens. So I hope you'll join us for that. All right, I think that's the end of, I don't see any more questions. So thank you, Blake.
Thank you, everyone. Have a great night.
Good night, everybody.